that she was not one of these breathtaking girls who believe themselves to be too beautiful to approach and automatically see any man as a supplicant or libidinous goon. The chilly ones, and who require tactics of attrition rather than feigned affinity, an affinity that is heartbreakingly easy to feign, I have to say, if you know your female typologies. I can repeat that if you like, if you want to get it exact. Her description of the rape, certain logistics of which I'm omitting, was lengthy and detailed and rhetorically innocent. I felt more and more sad, hearing it, trying to imagine what she'd been able to pull off, and felt more and more sad that on our way out of the park I'd felt that tiny stab of disappointment, maybe even anger, wishing she'd been more of a challenge. That her will and wishes had opposed my own just a little more. This, by the way, is known as Veriters' axiom, whereby, quote, the intensity of a desired D is inversely proportional to the ease of D's gratification, known also as romance. And sadder that it had not once, it seemed, you'll like this, not once occurred to me before what an empty way this was to come at women then. Not evil or predatory or sexist, empty. To gaze and not see, to eat and not be full, not just to feel but be empty. While, meanwhile, within the narrative itself, she, still deep inside the psychotic whose penis is still inside her, glimpsing his palm's thumb's web as he tentatively attempted to stroke her own head in return, seeing the fresh cut and realizing it was his own blood the fellow had used for his forehead's mark, which was not a rune or glyph at all, I knew, but a simple circle, the void, the zero, that axiom of romance we call also mathematics, pure logic, whereby 1 does not equal 2 and cannot, and that the, quote, rapist's mocha color and aquiline features could well be Brahminic instead of Negroid. Aryan, in other words. These and other details she withheld. She had no reason to trust me. And nor can I can't for the life of me recall whether she ate the price sticker, nor what became of the apple at all, whether she discarded it or what. Terms like love and soul and redeem that I believed could be used only with quotation marks, exhausted cliches. Believe that I felt the mulatto's fathomless sadness then. Q. It's not a good word, I know. It's not just, quote, sadness the way one feels sad at a funeral or film. More a plummeting quality, a timelessness to it, the way the light gets in winter just before dusk. Or that, all right, how, say, at the height of lovemaking, the very height, when she's starting to come, when she's truly responding to you now and you can see it in her face that she's starting to come, her eyes widening in that way that is both surprise and recognition, which not a woman alive can fake or feign if you really look intently at her eyes and really see her. You know what I'm talking about. That apical moment of maximum human sexual connection when you feel closest to her, with her, so much closer and realer and more ecstatic than your own coming, which always feels more like losing your grip on the person who's grabbed you to keep you from falling. A mere neural sneeze that's not even in the same ballpark's area code as her coming, and I know what you will make of this, but I'll tell you anyhow. But how even this moment of maximum connection and joint triumph and joy at making them start to come has this void of piercing sadness to it. Of the loss of them in their eyes as their eyes widen to their very widest point, and then as they begin to come, begin to shut, close, the eyes do, and you feel that familiar little needle of sadness inside your exultation as they arch and their eyes close, and you can feel that they've closed their eyes to shut you out. You've become an intruder. Their union is now with the feeling itself, the climax, that behind those drawn lids the eyes are now rolled all the way around and staring intently inward, into some void where you who brought them there cannot follow. That's shit. I'm not putting it right. I can't make you feel what I felt. You'll turn this into narcissistic male wants woman's gaze on him at climax, I know. Well, I don't mind telling you I'd begun to cry at the Anecdote's climax. Not loudly, but I did. Neither of us were smoking by now. We were both up against the headboard, facing the same way, though endorsed is how I remember it for the story's last part, when I wept. Memory is strange. I do remember listening for some acknowledgement from her that I was crying. I felt embarrassed, not for crying, but for wanting so badly to know how she took it, whether it made me seem sympathetic or selfish. She stayed where he left her all day, supine in the gravel, weeping, she said, and giving thanks to her particular religious principles and forces. When, of course, as I'm sure you could have predicted, I was weeping for myself. He left the knife and drove off in the unmuffled cutlass, leaving her there. He may have told her not to move or do anything for some specified interval. If he did, I know she obeyed. She said she could still feel him inside her soul, the mulatto. It was hard to break the focus. I felt certain that the psychotic had driven off somewhere to kill himself. It seemed clear from the anecdote's outset that someone was going to have to die. The story's emotional impact on me was profound and unprecedented, and I will not even try to explain it to you. She said she wept because she had realized that as she stood hitchhiking, her religion's spiritual forces had guided the psychotic to her, that he had served as an instrument of growth in her faith and capacity to focus and alter energy fields by the action of her compassion. She wept out of gratitude, she says. He left the knife up to the handle in the ground next to her where he had thrust it, apparently stabbing the ground dozens of times with desperate savagery. She said not one word about my weeping or what it signified to her. I displayed far more affect than she did. She learned more about love that day with a sex offender than at any other stage in her spiritual journey, she said. Let's both have one last one and then that will be it. That her whole life had indeed led inexorably to that moment when the car stopped and she got in, that it was indeed a kind of death, but not at all in the way she had feared as they entered the secluded area. That was the only real commentary she indulged in, just at the anecdote's end. I did not care whether it was, quote, true. It would depend on what you meant by true. I simply didn't care. I was moved, changed, believe what you will. My mind seemed to be moving at the, quote, speed of light. I was so sad. And that whether or not what she believed happened, it seemed true even if it wasn't. That even if the whole focused soul connection theology, that even if it was just catacretic New Age goo, her belief in it had saved her life, so whether or not it's goo becomes irrelevant, no? Can you see why this, realizing this, would make you feel conflicted of realizing your entire sexuality and sexual history had less genuine connection or feeling than I felt simply lying there listening to her talk about lying there realizing how lucky she'd been, that some angel had visited her in psychotic guise and shown her what she'd spent her whole life praying was true? You believe I'm contradicting myself, but can you imagine how any of it felt? Seeing her sandals across the room on the floor and remembering what I'd thought of them only hours before? I kept saying her name and she would ask, what? And I'd say her name again. I'm not afraid of how this sounds to you. I'm not embarrassed now. But if you could understand, can you see why there's no way I could let her just go away after this? Why I felt this apical sadness and fear at the thought of her getting her bag and sandals and New Age blanket and leaving, and laughing when I clutched her hem and begged her not to leave and said I loved her, and closing the door gently and going off barefoot down the hall and my never seeing her again? Why it didn't matter if she was fluffy or not terribly bright? Nothing else mattered. She had all my attention. I'd fallen in love with her. I believed she could save me. I know how this sounds, trust me. I know your type and I know what you're bound to ask. Ask it now. This is your chance. I felt she could save me, I said. Ask me now. Say it. I stand here naked before you. Judge me, you chilly cunt. You dyke, you bitch, coos, cunt, slut, gash. Happy now? All borne out? Be happy. I do not care. I knew she could. I knew I loved. End of story.